Hey there folks, Joey DeAngelis here with a general movie review. I haven't done one in a while because I've been really busy. The last time I did one was for Captain America. Hopefully I'll have reviews for like Amazing Spider-Man, Godzilla, and then obviously X-Men Days of Future Past will be part of my X-Men video series. So on those another day. But for now I'm talking about the 1977 film Sorcerer, which for a very long time did not have a very good print. The only other version I could find was a really crappy DVD, and even then I just sat on my hands and I'm just like, I'm waiting for a Blu-ray. Why was I excited for this Blu-ray? A few reasons. First off, directed by William Friedkin, director of such films as The French Connection and The Exorcist, and I love both of those films. Second, Roy Scheider's in it, star of Jaws, and he's also in The French Connection. There you go. Third reason is a more interesting reason of this was an adaptation of a Georges Renard book, which was eventually adapted into the classic 1950s movie Wages of Fear, directed by Henri-Georges Clouzot, and is a very well-made suspense film. It's running at about, sorry, I'm low and prepared, about 2.5 hours. This film runs about a half hour shorter because it's different, you know. And people like to refer to this as a remake, even though Friedkin really hates to label it as such, because it's not really a remake as much as it is an adaptation of a source material. Like, would you consider the 1941 Maltese Falcon to be a remake? Because that's based off of book 2. That kind of gets tricky with adaptations. Same thing with Hamlet. That's an adaptation, not really a remake so much. So, in order to justify it's just kind of a weird wording of things. But at the end of the day, whether I consider this a remake or an adaptation, this is one of my, it's become one of my favorite movies of all time. The film, as well as the other versions, deal with 4 truck drivers who are driving trucks filled with nitroglycerin in a suicide mission that will pay them a lot of money. Same thing happens in both versions. And in both versions of the story, they're in a really crappy country. Like, this is like the most out there, third world country you'll ever see. And it just feels so desolate and crappy. Nobody would want to be there. The only reason why I want to be there is so that way no one would find you. That's the only reason why. And these 4 men find themselves in that location for one reason or another. You have Roy Scheider, who was a criminal in New Jersey and is wanted because he killed a really prominent criminal's brother. So he has to go to this strange country for that reason. There's a Frenchman, and there's like bribery and money involved, so he has to run away from France. A terrorist, a terrorist, who's in Israel, had to leave. And then you have this really shady assassin guy who left Mexico. So you have these 4 guys that come from different backgrounds, and they all want the same thing. They want to get out of this hellhole, basically, and they're willing to put their lives on the line or not so that way they can get enough money to get out of where they are. So that's the basic thrust of the story, and both stories, The Wages of Fear and Sorcerer, are very suspenseful, and these are 2 films that always have me. These are films that have me at the edge of my seat almost every moment. There's a bunch of explosions that happen in the movie, and one of my favorite scenes is where the company that's hiring them to drive the trucks with nitroglycerin, they find that nitroglycerin, but it's like really wet, so it's been there for a year, so it's like more apt to explode. He gets a little bit on his hand, and he's gently, ever so gently, you see him sweating, trying to get it off his hand, and he throws it. It goes off, but it doesn't hurt anybody, but it just shows you how dangerous this stuff is. And you have a lot of explosions that happen in the film, so you're like, oh my god, this is serious business. What I really like about this film is that, like the other 2 Friedkin films I've mentioned, Exorcist and The French Connection, they feel like documentaries. They're not just narrative movies, but they're films. They're narrative films that have a documentary quality to them, and that's because Friedkin started out as a documentarian. And I'd say that that's really one of the main strengths of these films, is that what's happening on screen feels real because it's there. Like, when there's one scene, really famous shot in the movie, where you have the truck driving on this rickety bridge, all the storms, like, surging, and you have, like, the trees moving in, somebody almost falls over. Great scene, and it's real because that's a real truck, a real bridge, it's shot like it's real, but it's still exciting like a narrative film would be, and it's not a computer effect. You know, if you made this today, everything would be like a CGI computer. You'd probably have The Rock and Vin Diesel in it for some reason. And it would just I'm not saying they're crappy actors or anything, but it would just kind of feel like, whatever, man, I really don't need to see this. This movie, I showed this to my younger brother and one of his friends, and they were like, this movie's nuts. You know, it's a movie that's 2 hours long, uses the first hour to set up the characters. Like, in the opening, you have like a prologue for each character that kind of establishes why they have to go to this country in the first place. And then you have, you know, the second hour of the movie, which is driving the trucks. And that is really a ride. And I will never forget watching that. Also, I love the endings to both of these films, both Wages of Fear and Sorcerer. But I will say that, you know, they're different. You know, they don't have, like, certain characters are slightly altered, certain situations are different. But I love both movies, and I think you should really check out this new Blu-ray restoration of Sorcerer, or it's also available on DVD as well in a new version. There's no bonus features other than like a digipack like book. That's partly because the rights for this film have been contested and, you know, conflicted for so long because nobody knew who owned the rights. That's why nobody could ever get a good print of the film, and now we finally have a good print released by Warner Brothers with no bonus features. It's just a compromise we're gonna have to take because it's a great movie. Oh, and an interesting fact, this movie came out in 1977, which was also the same year as Star Wars. And I definitely would have to say Sorcerer is one of those films that was definitely affected by the presence of Star Wars. I think it would have done better if it was released earlier in the decade, or like before blockbuster type movies like Jaws and Star Wars, you know, were really coming into play. And I think, you know, it's really like the auteur is now like driven crazy in a jungle-like atmosphere, and then, you know, the budget balloons to something astronomical like $22 million in 1977. Really crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm just glad we have this film. This is a great movie. If you love The Exorcist and The French Connection, check this out. If you're not familiar with Friedkin, I would still say maybe rent it from somewhere, borrow it from a friend. It's a great movie. Check it out. I'll see you guys later.